So tell me, I understand that you grew up in Cleveland.
I did. I did. In what's funny is that when I tell people that a lot, oftentimes they say, "Oh, I grew up in Cleveland also." And it turns out they grew up in Shaker Heights or in Pepper Pike or something like that. But I actually grew up in East Cleveland. I came over as an infant, as an immigrant, and I actually came over as a DP, but as a displaced person. There was an act of Congress that after World War II, my parents were taken. My parents were peasants. They were taken from the villages as teenagers. My mother was 14. My father was 16, and they're taken by the Germans to work as forced labor on the farms. And after the war was over, they were in a section liberated by the British. They couldn't really return to the Ukraine because Stalin really had no use for the peasants. He took over their farms, and sent all the wheat to the proletariats, the workers in Moscow, and actually killed millions of people. So they were in basically a refugee situation until they were able to come to the United States, which through an act of Congress said that these displaced people could, if you had a job for them, if they were sponsored with somebody with a job, that they could enter the country. But I grew up right in East Cleveland, which now you hear all these horrible stories about the bus driver Castro, where he held those women for decades in their houses and stuff. But that's actually the neighborhoods that I grew up in.
What interests me though is growing up in that environment. How do you think that colored the way that you view the world?
I think it shaped me a bit as a person, in that there was a strong belief on my parents' part to perform well in school, to do well in school, and that was the positive part of it, and to be a hard worker, because my mother cleaned houses, my father had at least 2 jobs. He worked during the day, he worked at a gas station at night, and so there was a certain kind of a work discipline or work ethic that you grew up in. In terms of culturally, what you experienced from early age on was, and you didn't really recognize it until afterwards, you really experienced a world of violence. There was just. I went to school. A kid was shot in the schoolyard in the 6th grade. In the 8th grade. There was a gun. No bullets went off. But there was a gunfight right in the social studies class. Like the first class after lunch, where one kid pulled out a gun and and threatened to shoot somebody who would come into the room and wanted to beat him up, and I think that it gave me a certain feel for a texture of violence, I think that I took advantage of that cinemagraphically in some of the movies that I shot, and that you had a kind of a familiarity with the darkness and with the texture and the emotions of that.
Yeah.
I liked photographing that movie Last Exit to Brooklyn.
Yes. I'm sure this is the same for lots of creative people in various cities across America. But I would think that living in that world, being an artist, or when you happen upon the idea that maybe you're destined to be an artist, did people look at you like you were from Mars?
No, I think it wasn't really people. I grew up in some ways. It was a pretty wonderful time to grow up in, and a lucky time to grow up. But I grew up at during the hippie period. The end of the '60s, and well, there was a tremendous amount of conflict in in the United States, over the Vietnam War, long hair, I guess, and I felt that in a very immediate, personal way in my own home, because outside Cleveland, about 40 miles outside Cleveland, was Kent State. Well, that whole period with Nixon and whatever, what was wonderful about the university space was that it was a kind of a sanctuary away from everything that they were building geodesic domes, and it really changed my life to go to college, and I went to Case Western Reserve University, right in Cleveland. I stayed at home, but I was involved in tremendous personal conflicts with my parents over how I looked. Almost would come to blows, not from my end of it, but from my dad, in terms of the politics of Nixon, of the shooting of the students, and so basically I left home not in search of artistry or of a career in filmmaking. I changed my course of study to liberal arts, and studied and graduated humanities major with a concentration in film history and criticism. And I moved to New York. Went to the graduate program at Columbia University, and when that happened, I basically had a huge schism with my parents, and it wasn't over being an artist. It was really over the larger cultural and political issues that were going on in the country. And
right.
I didn't talk to my parents for 10 years. I didn't see them for 12 years. That was that big of a break. So it was hardened by my parents' own situation, as they never had the opportunity to grow through post-adolescent into any kind of rebellious kind of, period. They basically were slaves, There was no question but that you listened to authority, and what was going on in the world at that time, was totally contrary to that,
But what was going on in the world at that time? What's amazing to me is that the late 60s and 70s, those periods of tremendous turmoil, and we were going through such changes, but the films of that period actually addressed that in a way that I don't think the films of today really address the world we're living in today as much. Were those formative films for you?
I think less on a political, cultural level, is on just being interested in the experience of sitting in the movie theater and being moved by these films in a human kind of way, and that's different now, because people don't go to the movie theaters, I think, for that purpose anymore. There's just
right.
They're on their computers, they're on television, and they go to the movie theaters to see at least it seems to be the current. I'm not an expert at it, but just my sort of casual observance of it is that the blockbuster movies, that they take advantage of some kind of cultural phenomena of people wanting to go, a certain age bracket wanting to go to the movies to see, for a sort of social experience,
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think a bigger difference really is that those years when I was in school and making decisions about what to do with my life, there was really a feeling that all together that we were going to bring on a better new world in which the commonality between people, was going to be what moved it. That we all were we all were the same, and we were all going to make a better world, and there would be world peace, and everything was going to be great. And
yeah.
I think it's only until recently that I still had a positive feeling about that now. I mean, I don't mean to be overly cynical or overly sarcastic, but the truth is that the sort of public outrage at the government and at what was going on that existed back in the 60s and 70s, it just doesn't exist now, you know.
So you said that you studied, among other things, film history and criticism. When did your interest turn to photography and cinematography?
Well, I always thought of myself as sort of wanting to be a writer director, you know. And then I moved. I went to Columbia. I moved to New York City. I went to Columbia University, and it was a great time. It was in the early 70s to move to New York City. And what was great about it was that actually you could live in New York City pretty inexpensively. You know, you could find an apartment in a rougher neighborhood for a couple $100 a month. It was a easy city to move around in on the subway, and I really used that student aid money that I had, the loan money that I had, and whatever. That was a really valuable for me, not so much to study film or whatever, but to find a new home, you know, and and I felt entirely comfortable in, you know, I moved in on the Upper West Side by Columbia University. You know, I got an apartment. I felt entirely comfortable in that. It's mostly a Spanish neighborhood up there, and I think that coming from East Cleveland, it was, you know, it was the same turf in a way. You know, it was a lot more dense, and a different kind of things you had to watch out with. But I looked as much as a mugger amongst the muggers as the muggers. You know, I wasn't an easy target. You know, I didn't come from Connecticut, you know, or something like that. I wasn't someone that someone wasn't gonna. I both didn't particularly look like I had anything to steal, you know. And after like the first apartment I moved into, and they, you know, broke in through the fire escape, you know, and stole, you know, my little television, whatever I had over there, my jar of coins and whatever, you know. And you know that it's the same guys that you're, you know, when you're walking down the street, you know, the same guys that they're looking at you every day. And okay, you're out of the apartment, so let's go rob him, see what he's got. Mm-hmm. And then you learn that, okay, so what you do is you go and you go to the lumber yard and you buy some 2x6s, you know, or 2x4s and a piece of plywood, and you do everything that they tell you not to do. You board up your fire escape window, you know, and then the problem's solved, you know. So, but the, you know, but what it really allowed me was really to find myself as an adult, you know.
Yeah.
I actually knew as much as my film teachers. It was a graduate film program, but there were a lot of people coming in with degrees that didn't have a film background. You know, it was a kind of international group of people. And I actually was, while I was in Cleveland, I actually did work on some local film jobs with some people. So I actually knew the equipment and whatever. And I have to say that we still watched movies, you know, and had fun doing that. And but I immediately went to work and started to work, and then they called it non-union. I mean, now you'd call it independent, you know.
Right.
But there was a huge amount. There's no video, so there's a huge amount of actually public money that later got cut for doing documentary 16mm footage. So if you could load a film magazine, which wasn't hard to learn to do, you know, and they shoot mostly with the NPR. So you basically would get hired by a documentary guy to help carry in his equipment, set up whatever lights, to help him do whatever with that, and then you'd spend the day in the changing bag, loading and unloading film, for him to. The cameramen really did all the focus themselves and did all the shooting themselves. So I went to work. I don't know. You maybe make $50 a day, $75 a day doing that, and then there was also. So you just started to make contacts in the city and started to work for people, and that's where I became a technician, and I just didn't really have the resources to say, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write a script, And I think that some of the script ideas I really had were really about personal issues of growing up in Cleveland and finding myself and whatever. So I think that maybe I was sort of viewing that as a psychological kind of therapy. But so instead the therapy became starting to work and making a career in the what I could do was I was a very practically crafted person in terms I knew how to use tools, I knew how to build things, and stuff, and that kind of not afraid to get your hands dirty or actually being able to pick up pretty quickly on physical stuff made me a very good film mechanic right away. I went to I mean, I loved it. I didn't mind being the assistant cameraman, the gaffer, the grip. I didn't mind, the crews were so small. It was usually just a cameraman, a sound man, and me, And so I also had really a lot of energy and enthusiasm, and so that's so it really wasn't I wasn't steered in by some kind of and I'm sure they're true. I'm sure that people don't make this stuff up about getting the Super 8 camera when they were a kid, or getting a Brownie, or getting this. I made my first film when I was 4 years old. Went on from there. I've been interested in photography my whole life. It really wasn't my case. My case really was that I was interested in the experience of sitting in a dark movie theater and being moved, and that led me to a career as a technician to make a living, and that's then as you do it, then you sort of when I started out, there really weren't young cameramen, It was there really weren't young directors, and so and even though I lived in New York City, maybe it was fortunate, but I went and I took the test several times, or not necessarily. I took the test to join the film union, but it was a family business. You had to pass the test, which I had no problem passing the test, but then you had to be voted in by a 51% majority of the membership, and basically they did not vote for people that weren't in the family, so you couldn't get in the union. As ironic and unfair as it seemed, that's the way it operated. Somehow that wasn't legal. That wasn't illegal, because it was up against like unions, like the United Mine Workers or whatever, people at Teamsters, people that actually had a much more worse record of abuse. They actually did, they actually did put people in cement shoes, and put them in the river, So, but in some ways, I think that it accelerated my my movement within the independent world, and I was able to once I felt the confidence of having worked those key positions of being an assistant cameraman, which was basically kind of being familiar with putting the camera together and doing the focus on it, and I thought that was going to be a really satisfying job, and it actually really isn't, because you put your whole concentration into measuring and having to turn the lens at the same, the right distance that the actor is from the lens, and you wind up you actually have to narrow down your vision of what's going on in front of you in a way that it's not particularly satisfying, and
mm-hmm.
so I actually left it. I left that job and I became a gaffer, doing the lighting, and I found that a much more fun and a more creative job, and
sure.
I did a few jobs as key grip and whatever, and then I was fortunate to then get a break to shoot a movie. The first movie I shot was On the Edge, it was a Bruce Dern film that was shot in San Francisco. That a friend of mine who was a sound man, Jeffrey Hayes, who went on to be a Law and Order producer, but he hired me and it was basically a situation where they didn't have very much money, and he had the confidence that I could do the work, and so I got that job, and then unfortunately the director decided to edit it for 2 years, so and so like I thought that would be the toughest part, would be to get the first job, but it was, I think, even more difficult to get the second job, because if as a cinematographer your credits are that you shot a movie, in 6 weeks, in San Francisco, and it hasn't come out for over 2 years, and there's nothing for you to show because the director's still editing it, you're not going to get another job with that,
Right. I want to talk about a couple of these titles
sure.
in your resume. Starting with this beginning period that you're talking about, when you were working as a gaffer and various other positions on these film sets. Some amazing projects and people that you were working alongside of. From I guess someone like Michael Ballhaus from After Hours to At Close Range, which is one of my favorite films, and a film that is lit almost like a black and white noir in a way.
Yeah,
At Close Range.
Juan Ruiz Anchilla, was the DP on it. After Hours was a huge success for Martin Scorsese and for Michael Ballhaus, because I think they made it for a few $1 million, and it played in the movie theaters, and then they moved on to do their bigger budgeted projects after that. It was a good credit for me, because I think that in the world of how the producer is Robert Colesbury, who's not alive now. He had died some kind of heart problem quite young, but I think he was very proud of the accomplishment, and he was very complimentary in terms of giving me credit for handling the labor part of it,
Mm-hmm.
So that opened up. So all of a sudden, I think I'm not sure in the even the history of the resume, but I think I went to work at Close Range after that, and so
right.
So what it did was and what was happening was the Hollywood they were called negative pickup deals at that time, and so they would have union cinematographers and union sound department, and usually art department. Have a union production designer. They would go on location, and they would pretend not to be Warner Brothers or not to be Universal. They were just this company that had a deal with a distributor later. And so what they were looking for, because they didn't want the union organizers to come in and organize the projects, And so what they wanted was non-union, non-IA electricians and grips. And I was a source for that. I myself not only myself, but I knew the crew people to call in that could staff that for you in a way that had a mark of credibility and a mark of guarantee in a way after you weren't taking a chance after having done the After Hours movie. So it's fortunate that I worked at close range with Juan Ruiz-Anchia, who's a special talented cinematographer in terms of working in that kind of darkness kind of thing, and so I did a number of those types of projects until I was able to after I shot my first movie, rather than I actually went back to being a gaffer and a grip, waiting for what I had confidence would be a decent project, rather than go and do some really low budget horror film or something that was, that I didn't really want to do. I'd rather work on a good movie as a gaffer, as a grip, than to be shooting, something that was a piece of shit,
Yeah.
So, and then my next opportunity came with the Thin Blue Line and with the Vampire's Kiss and with Last Exit to Brooklyn, So
I want to ask you about the Thin Blue Line, because with that film, we're talking about one of the great defining documentaries of the past 25 years. What is unique about shooting documentary as opposed to narrative, and are there any occasions where you can apply documentary techniques to these big features that you do?
Errol had worked on that for years and years and years before I was involved. I came in more of a finishing stage in which we did all of the recreations, dramatic recreations with him, and it was funny because he told me that the film was going to play in the movie theaters. I worked on it for about a month, and frankly, I didn't believe him, because those kind of movies didn't play in movie theaters, and I think it did reshape the documentary, but it was because it wasn't shot in a documentary style, and I actually did work on quite a few documentaries that were shot with a more kind of handheld, camera, capturing the reality that was over there, and I think that, and I'm equally interested in that. I think that what I really brought to the Thin Blue Line was a craft of having worked on commercials, a craft for being able to come up with strong, immediate visual imagery that had, a metaphorical kind of, content to it and strength to it, and it's and also just like the milkshake shot that with the thing landing on the ground. I shot that in 10 minutes,
Wow.
I shot and I lit it. I was and I am a fast cameraman. I'm able to execute things in either that satisfy a director's imagination. I remember having a sort of philosophical discussion argument with Errol in the car, and what I did was I got a couple of zoom lenses because I wanted to shoot telephoto, and I wanted to, and also he didn't have any sets really. I had to shoot we shot some stuff some place in Brooklyn, and some kind of where you could go and you could shoot real guns in the street, and the cops weren't gonna show up because it wasn't that kind of neighborhood. We were like some part of Red Hook over there, and some where it was like some kind of abandoned garage, and then I could go put the camera across the street, get myself another 30, 40 feet across the street and shoot down the corridor of the garage and make it feel like it's outside. But I remember having an Errol who could be quite academic and certainly has 100% 100% self-confidence in the fact that he's an authority about anything and everything, especially photography and lenses, telling me that he didn't use zoom lenses, that he hated lenses, he liked prime lenses, and I said, I would say, yeah, yeah, come on, and so I think what I brought to it really was in his budget to shoot a lot of very expressive, images that sort of set a kind of part of a skeleton, framework for for the movie for him,
Sure.
So.
And I want to ask you about director collaborations. In particular, of course, Tim Burton, you've done stunning work with. And this is a very special filmmaker, it goes without saying, that has just such an exceptional visual sense. Do you feel your work with him is so bold? Do you feel freedom to experiment with Mr. Burton in a way that you don't usually get from?
What was great about Tim was that he did really allow you to collaborate. Like what it was is I imagine that people don't change that much. I think that he's probably the same way, but he provides you with such an interesting, what do you want to call it, canvas or stage to work on with the costuming and the scene design or whatever. So it's not like it's pretty kind of clear what direction you should go in. It's not like it's like you need to rack your brain about how am I going to light this or how I'm going to photograph this or whatever. But I was fortunate in working with Tim in a pre-digital period, I think on the movie Batman Returns. I mean, they at that time they thought that was a lot, but there's only 120 visual effects shots in the whole movie, Where now, there's probably 1,200, visual effects shots, and what, when you went into the Penguin's lair, that was a real set, real physical set. Now there's no way that they would do that. I guess it's both for cost, but it's also just considered not the way that you do stuff. It's all green screen work, So you get a movie like Iron Man 3, which is, except for his Robert Downey's face, the whole movie is CG,
Right.
Right. The sets, the costumes, his body, So it also was a period of time when everything was still photochemically, you're shooting on 35 millimeter, and it was all photochemical, and you basically the cinematographer had a position of power that I don't think exists now because it's truly more collaborative now, because on the HD picture, I mean, it's different if I guess it's a green screen, then it turns into an editorial or visual effects kind of thing. But basically, it was only until you got the dailies the next day that people, and you understood that you couldn't always say, no, I'm not ready, and you always were making compromises because you have to stay on schedule, and stay on budget. But you did have but you were the person that the picture did pass through in terms of photographing it. They didn't turn on the camera until you said, the AD or the director didn't say roll until they asked you, can we shoot? And so what was great about Tim was he never told you how to light anything. He would say that, well, I think this should be really scary or this or that, but he really and I found that he had that same sort of relationship with the actors, and actresses. He didn't really tell them what to do. Really, he watched their performance and he would comment on it, and sometimes he did things. What he would do is he would want to come in and he would want to rehearse and block the scene physically with where the characters would move around and where he and he was very, very skilled at not over-covering something. He didn't shoot. He wasn't a formula shooter in which, they say, okay, I need like a master and then close-ups and matching over the shoulder shots or this or that. That he actually shot it in a kind of way that it couldn't be edited in an infinite number of ways. He did have a real clear sense of how he thought the scene should be assembled or edited together. And so, whereas sometimes you'd spend what might seem, by today's standards, what might seem an inefficient or an inordinate amount of time rehearsing, it was he would make up for it when he went to shoot it, because he wouldn't do too many takes and he wouldn't do too much coverage.
Right.
I of course would love to be working with Tim Burton. I'm not. I'd have to say that I think that the movies I did with him were really great movies, and I think they looked. I thought they were photographed, and the lighting in them was was great. And like now there's a tremendous amount of visual manipulation in post, and but I was fortunate in that I shot a black and white film with him that actually was shot on black and white film. It wasn't made in a DI suite. That was my skill as a cinematographer.
Did you guys get any, because Ed Wood is such an extraordinary movie, did you guys get any resistance when you made the decision that you definitely wanted to shoot it in black and white?
Yeah, the movie almost didn't get made. Tim, I think it was complicated. He was going through a change of life. He broke his relationship off with Warner Brothers, and I think he wanted to go to Columbia, and then there was all this. I would only read about it because Tim wasn't a person that really talked to you very much, Then that fell apart supposedly on the issue of shooting it in black and white, and then he went back to Disney or Buena Vista, whichever name they had at that time, where he started, and they agreed to let him do it in black and white, and so I think that I wasn't privy to the resistance that was there in putting the movie together, because I'm not involved in that. What I was privy to was that I live in New York, and I wanted them to develop the negative, in a movie that was being shot in Hollywood. I wanted them to develop the negative in at DuArt Labs. That actually did it in I think they were doing it in Boston. They were running the chemistry, and the reason I wanted that was that I did some tests, and there was like a lab Kinolux that they didn't the Technicolor and the big places, they were such big labs that they couldn't do things in a small way, so that and I don't mean to badmouth Kinolux or whatever, but it makes a difference. The laboratory, makes a difference in terms of the chemistry control over the temperature and the chemicals they're putting in the different developing solutions and printing solutions. And so Tim was great in that he that even though it meant not seeing the dailies until 2 days later, Tim made them, and I was helped at the last minute because I was doing some tests, and they decided to send it to a lab in LA, and it came back, and they said that they did it because they had to rush it, which really wasn't true. They just were hoping to at the last minute change the deal, and it came back all brown colored or whatever. It looked horrible. It looked horrible when they put it up, And so I said, I'm telling you, you can't, you can't, you could fuck it up, like let's not. It took a director of his stature to be able to pull that off, Then in the end, what was really good for me on that project, I think I had 5 weeks prep, and Tim, in his own kind of method way of being a director, Tim actually had moved to Poughkeepsie, where Ed Wood was from, and in his own way, he was being Ed Wood, I think, and in his mind, Ed Wood would never really prep for a movie too much, and so he was very involved in the costume issues and some of the design issues, but less so than on Edward Scissorhands or on Batman Returns, and so I really had 5 weeks to study black and white photography, and the way you do that is you shoot tests and you print it, and part of the skill, which is not necessary anymore, but when movies were being shot on 35 millimeter, photochemical process, and then printed, where you actually had selected takes and they printed this take and that take, and then it was assembled as a work print, by the editor. You needed to get in sync with the lab. You wanted the picture to come out exactly the way you wanted it to, either through your imagination or as you were executing it. When something was going to fall to pitch black and you couldn't see anything, then or where something was going to burn out or be too hot over here, so you really needed to get all that down in a very sort of, I guess scientific. It has to do with measuring light and figure out how dark you want a person's face to be, and like what I could pick up in black and white photography was two things. It was that oftentimes, even at night, that a normal brightness, you'd have a person's face on the bright side of their face, you could actually get away with it being a little bit brighter than you would in color film, But then, and so I took advantage of that, and of course it's a luxury to be able to shoot these very expensive tests. You've got a camera, and then you got to buy the film, and then you got to send it to the laboratory. They make prints for you, come back. It's something you never could afford to do on your own.
Right.
And so I had a crash course, and it didn't have the sophisticated digital previewing that exists nowadays. But so for me, it was a crash course in shooting black and white, stock, and printing it. And much to my surprise, there were the other thing was that there wasn't, this was, I don't know, I mean, when was that? Probably almost 20 years ago, 18 or 19 years ago. But there wasn't the choice of black and white film. There basically were two stocks available. One was 250 ASA, and one was 80 ASA. And so I was, and it wasn't, and I knew black and white film from taking still photography in college, and developing the film in your own, bathroom, and it seemed like, but there wasn't even any kind of Tri-X. There was no 500 ASA film, so it was 250. But when I looked at it, both stocks really recorded darkness really well. The fast film, you can make black, really, really well, and the slow film really well also. Where it surprised me was that on the 250 ASA stock, the faster film, the sort of normal scenes, like a daylight exterior or an interior that was supposed to be during the day, was very, very grainy, in a way that I didn't think, as I watched, because I was lucky to get 35 millimeter prints of Ed Wood's films, and they weren't meant to look shitty, Some of the sort of shittiness of it probably sort of came from people watching them as kinescopes, at 2 o'clock in the morning on their broadcast television, where it's all scratched up and whatever. These guys were actually trying to do a good job, but I think that maybe they had more real silver in their black and white footage, and that the chemistry was more unenvironmentally friendly, but it was more good for black and white photography. But what surprised me on the faster stock was it was so grainy, and it didn't really. I didn't want it to look like Schindler's List, or I didn't want it to look like a grainy documentary thing. I wanted it to be, look like a silver and black, movie. And so I went with the slower film, which was 80 ASA, which means you have to light it, it's 80 daylight, 64 tungsten, which means you have to light it up more. But I never had a problem with lighting anything, just in some ways, when you actually need to use more light, then the difference in light intent, like if you're working at a base level where your base exposure is like 100 foot candles, which is like old technology, nobody works that way anymore. But if you have to shine, if you measure it and you have to shine 100 foot candles on something to make it come out look normal, then to go one stop over, you go to 200. To go two stops under, it's 100, one stop under would be 50, two stops under would be 25. So there's quite a bit of difference between 25-foot candles and 100-foot candles, in terms of quantity. Whereas if you're working in low light and your base is like 4-foot candles, then all of a sudden, if you want to go two stops under, that's it's 4 to 1-foot candle. It's easier actually to make a mistake sometimes when you're working at a lower light level, because it's something that I didn't mind like shooting it at higher stop. I would just bash the light in there, and then if it's 100 over here, then I want it to be 2.5 over there. Then it's got to be 250. Okay, if it's not 250 exactly, maybe it's 215 or maybe it's 275. Who gives a shit? I can move on. So whereas when you were doing the lower light level stuff, you had to measure very carefully. The other thing that surprised me on the black and white stock was that on color negative, I never worried about overexposing something. You never really worried about the backlight, how bright the backlight was, or if you're by a window, how bright is it outside, Like, you really only sort of only paid to the underexposure part of it, paid attention to it, because that's where you would, and I don't get overly technical about it, but that's where you could, that's really what was important. Whereas I found, to my surprise, on the black and white stock, that it didn't look good when the hair light or for the backlight was too overexposed. It looked like Bride of Frankenstein, sometimes, and you didn't want it always to look that way. If you wanted to have, especially if you were trying to match something, like what I tried to do in the movie was that the pieces of the movie that actually were exact, supposed to be replications of Bride of the Monster or Glen or Glenda. I wanted those to look exactly in the composition and the framing and the lighting. I wanted them to look just like the movie. I wanted to be able to duplicate that or replicate that, and then take my own personal freedom in doing the other stuff that was between the scenes there, the personal story of Bela Lugosi and Edward, in between. But it's such a beautiful, good-natured movie. I mean, your work. Yeah, what's ironic was that I think it was a bomb. It was when it came out. I think it didn't do very well at the box office, and I think it was only until the end of the year that that the award seasons came up that Bela Lugosi, that the Martin Landau character got recognized for Bela Lugosi, and that. But that happens to when there were movies that I loved watching as a student, and that really did shape me or that I learned from. But one of the movies that I really loved was Night of the Hunter, that Charles Lawton directed.
Yes, yes.
Which was, it's like just a beautifully photographed movie, and then you read about that, and that was a bomb also, So what is great is that some movies are able to get past that and survive that, and over the test of time, just are able to be recognized for what they were.
Well, I can tell you that my movie geek friends, we talk about Ed Wood all the time. So I mean, it's definitely survived in a very special way amongst people that love movies. I wanted to share with you that you told me where you're from in Cleveland. Actually, you shot a lot of Edward Scissorhands in my hometown.
Okay.
Of Lakeland, Florida.
Yeah, no. It was Land of Lutz in Lakeland, and
yes,
the Zephyr Hills there, and all those places,
That's my area. I remember vividly when I was a teenager going to the set, and I probably saw you work, and so this.
Well, I'll tell you, it's a funny story. We were scouting there, I think it was during the scout period or whatever, when we were in that neighborhood. And Johnny was somewhere in the background, or whatever. And all of a sudden, this mob of teenage girls come running around a corner, and Tim and I were standing there, and they literally run us over to Johnny, to get who's smoking a cigarette or something in the back. And Tim made a funny comment, like I could see it in the Hollywood Reporter, director DP, killed in stampede,
trampled by
to see Johnny Depp fan stampede,
Wow, yeah, that was a very special, cool thing for me to be able to see that film set in action. Given the changes that you've talked about with the digital technology and a lot of the art of cinematography has definitely evolved over the years, do you still get the same kick out of cinematography? Does it still turn you on in the same way?
Yeah, no, I'm a process oriented, person. I've only been able to sustain myself by enjoying, shooting, and that actually, that actually still remains true. I mean, I like working with the equipment. I like working with the crew. I like actually motivating people to, to all work towards a photographic end. The difference is that the difference is that the sort of mystery of the alchemy that used to sort of exist in photographing an image, that's not there anymore. Now, basically what you see is what you get, and that's not a bad thing. In some ways, it allows you to collaborate more clearly with the people around you. The technology is very exciting in terms of the on the set coloring that you could do. That no longer you actually don't need to. You actually don't need to send it to a third party and rely on a conversation that you had with them, or rely on some kind of test that you did that I like it to look like this way. It's right there in front of you. There's really no reason to not have the picture look exactly like you want it to look.
Yeah. And final question for you. If you were to teach a class on cinematography, which you might have, I'm not sure, but if you were to, what films or particular scenes would you show your class to teach various lessons about the art form?
I probably would wind up just investigating what was out there, but I think I basically would start with the black and white films that I loved as a student. Obviously the Orson Welles films and the movies like favorites of mine were like Night of the Hunter. I thought another movie I think I liked was I Married a Zombie.
Yeah.
He walked around. I liked because I was, very much, interested in the world of light and shadow, and I'm a fugitive from a chain gang. So I had there's a particular emotional kind of sentimentality of movies that I liked that made me excited about the world of light and dark. Really, there's interesting things that are on television now.
Yes.
That I think that in some ways I think television has taken on there might be more interesting work being done in television than there are in the movie theaters at this point, because they have good actors and they got away from the sort of the bland, overly safe, standards of photography that used to exist over there. And there's very, very good camera work and very good lighting, and very good acting, very good stories being done.